She spent 2018 circumnavigating the globe and for the New York Times, reporting on every destination. Before that, she spent over a decade as a contributing editor and culture feature writer for New York Magazine and its websites. And while there, she covered film festivals around the world, presidential conventions, as well as wrote essays about feminism and Asian American representation. Her cover stories and feature profiles have included Stevie Nicks, Samuel L. Jackson, Anna DuVernay, and Bill Murray. She has also freelanced for a number of magazines, including Bloomberg Business Week, Elle, Glamour, and Vogue. She grew up in Milwaukee, New Mexico.
Everybody, please give it up for Jada Yuan. You were born in Los Alamos, grew up in Milwaukee, and your grandmother, who is the famous physicist Chen Sheng Wu, was actually a researcher for the Manhattan Project. Can you tell us about her?
Yeah, she's actually, I should probably show a photo of her from here, but she was a Chinese immigrant physicist, born in, here she is, she's in the book, and this is with her with Oppenheimer. And so she studied physics in China. She came from a family that, just sort of a really lucky set of circumstances where both of her parents believed in educating girls at a time when that wasn't really the case in most of China. And she made her way sort of as far as she could go in physics education in China. And they didn't have any graduate programs, so she ended up going to America, and she landed in Berkeley. She had a sort of position at University of Michigan, but when she was at Berkeley, she met Ernest Lawrence and saw the cyclotron. And I don't know if she met Oppenheimer that one time. She also met my grandfather. He was the Chinese immigrant who gave her the tour. And so she ended up studying at Berkeley and studying someone under Oppenheimer, really working with Lawrence and Luis Alvarez, and then got involved in the Manhattan Project from Columbia, where she worked on things like improving the Geiger counter. And there was a problem that Enrico Fermi had with the nuclear reactor that was in Chicago, and a sort of paper that she had worked on at Berkeley but hadn't published because of the war. Basically, the information was too dangerous for it to get out. So she sort of had enough information to be able to sort of tell Enrico Fermi what was happening to the nuclear reactor and why it kept stopping, it was off-gassing xenon. My dad explained this to me in the car. I'm not a scientist. He is a scientist at Los Alamos. But yeah, that xenon gas was capturing the neutrons, and so the chain reaction couldn't keep going. But the result was sort of what you see in the Oppenheimer movie, which is that fishbowl where they're sort of we have the fuel is so hard to get the right kind of uranium, the right uranium isotopes, and they're dropping these marbles into this fishbowl. That's what she was working on, and without her contribution, it probably would have taken a lot longer to get to that amount of fuel that they needed.
And they even put her on a stamp, is that right?
They did. Yeah, and in 20, so yeah, the picture of her in there is on a stamp. So yeah, 2021, she was put on a stamp. Honestly, the Manhattan Project is sort of the least, it's a big name to say that she worked on it, and she was a woman. There weren't that many women physicists involved, but yeah, she worked on an experiment. She designed an experiment that basically disproved a law of physics, what was thought to be a law of physics, called parity. So it's non-conservation of parity, and I'm so bad at explaining this. I apologize to all the scientists. It's been a while since I've explained it. But anyway, she worked on this, and the men that she worked with got the Nobel Prize. She did not, and that's sort of one of these correctives of history that is sort of still ongoing.
So I love the book. Tell me how you got the opportunity to write it. You're a feature writer for the Washington Post, so getting interviews is a big part of what you do, but you got some really exciting ones for this, including Emily Blunt, Robert Downey Jr.
So it's a commissioned book. It's not like I came to them with this idea that I was going to write this book. Basically, I had a friend at the Washington Post who's also from Los Alamos, whose parents live on Bathtub Row. and he started sending me these messages. I wasn't really paying that much attention because I was, as Cecile said, covering national politics, so I didn't really know that Oppenheimer was shooting. The production kept dropping off notices at his friend's house, and like it was coming. Like the time when they were going to shoot in Los Alamos was coming, and I really wanted to be on set. It wasn't even my beat at the Post, and I just wrote this impassioned letter, and I said, I really want to get on set. What can I do? And didn't get a reply. Because they were already shooting. And I had included in there like a line like, if you ever do a making of book or something, like just let me know. And I didn't get on set, but we actually just showed up. So, as you can do, I did a little reporting with Los Alamos County and the liaisons for the film office, and I got to sort of wander through the sets as they were making them. There wasn't a lot of security on that end. Christopher Nolan's a very secretive director, and I wasn't surprised that I couldn't get on set, even if it was for an article in the future, and I said I wasn't going to publish it until the movie came out. But I sort of like lurked in the bushes with some nurses and watched like the bottom of Emily Blunt's leg. And then we stood outside Fuller Lodge. My dad came and joined, and I think he brought the binoculars, which was like a very good plan. And my mom, and then we told my mom she was missing out, and so she came up, and we sort of like did photo shoots on the vintage army trucks, which I'm sure you weren't supposed to do, but everyone was doing it. And it was just like a really fun day, and I sort of thought that was going to be it. And then Chris's wife, Christopher Nolan's wife, who's also his producer, Emma Thomas, called me up and asked if I would do this book, and I almost didn't because it's really not that much money to make a book like this. And is it on?
Yeah. Now it is.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But I really found it to be like a way for me to learn a lot about the history of Los Alamos, which I didn't really, as a kid, I wasn't that curious about it, I think. And to also learn about a time when my grandma lived. It's been really instructive. I learned all these things about the time when she lived and people that she worked with who are sort of just like glimpses in the movie, but they're like big people in her life. And I went to her archive recently, and I found a letter from this physicist, Luis Alvarez, with like full of affection. And in the movie, he's the kid who sort of is in the barbershop, and he sees that the Germans have discovered nuclear fission, and he comes running over. But that was like her good friend. So that was why it was important for me to do it. In terms of the interviews, they were set up through Nolan's production company. He has like one guy who's his right-hand guy who is like amazing and the keeper of all information. And it's like if Andy emails you, and you're Robert Downey Jr., then you get on the phone with me. So that's sort of what happened. He was one of the more delightful ones. It's Robert Downey Jr.
Well, and were there any fun things that happened during the interviews that didn't make it to the book?
Yeah, well, so for him, what I really loved, my editor just didn't think it was interesting enough to include, but for New Mexicans, I think it's really interesting, is that Robert Downey Jr. actually lived in Milwaukee when he was 16 years old. His father was kind of how would you describe his dad as a filmmaker?
He was an indie filmmaker, and the film was, do you know the title? It was Greaser's Palace.
Greaser's Palace. It was Greaser's Palace, and he was he was kind of like a gonzo indie filmmaker. And I had learned about him because Robert Downey Jr. did this documentary about his dad. And it was when his dad was dying, called Senior. And it's lovely. I think it's a really lovely movie. And I was putting two and two together, and I was like, so Oppenheimer must have been the first movie that you did after your dad died. And he was like, yeah, it was. It was the first time he'd signed on to a movie. And it was sort of a way for him to come here and pay tribute to his dad. And that he became really good friends with Alden Ehrenreich, who plays the Senate aide, a much younger actor. And they did a trip up to Taos to where the Dennis Hopper place, because his dad knew Dennis Hopper. So I just sort of thought that those were like, I had so much affection for him after hearing like these stories and his affection for New Mexico.
And Ruth DeJong becomes a bit of a hero of the book.
Sure. I love her. She's a production designer.
And at a certain point, she figures out that anything that can be shot in Santa Fe instead of LA ought to be shot here so that they can get the tax credit. Can you tell us any more about that?
Yeah, well, so it wasn't just Ruth. It was also Tom Paisner, who was a producer and also controlled the money, which I think was the main thing. But it was basically that they really, Robert Downey Jr.'s whole sequence is in the Senate, and they really wanted to try to shoot in Washington, but turns out you can't actually shoot there in the Senate. It's too much of a working building, and there's a lot of restrictions, and it was too expensive to shoot anything in DC. They didn't want to really shoot in. I guess it was the tax break in Santa Fe that really made it like they sort of found out last minute that they could get a tax break if they stayed longer. I think even you pay like the actors' salaries, you get sort of a break on them on some level if they stay for a month. So they had to sort of make sure they stayed in New Mexico for a month and were going to shoot this. So they ended up.
They're looking for places to make Santa Fe look like DC.
Well, the thing is, they didn't really need to shoot outside DC, and that's the same thing with like shooting inside Oppenheimer's house in Los Alamos. Was you could shoot in these authentic spaces without really revealing where they were in the world, because you don't need to see the outside of the Senate building. You just see the interiors, and if it looks, it's got like a beautiful wood banister or great bench, you can kind of make it look like what you need it to be. But yeah, so Santa Fe, you got them for like I think almost like at least a week.
When you grew up in Los Alamos, Oppenheimer was a really celebrated hero of the little town. And in the movie, it's very much Nolan asking, is he Shiva, the destroyer of worlds? Is he Prometheus? Is that consistent with the way Oppenheimer struggled with the realities of the Manhattan Project? Did that humanize him? I mean, who is he to you as the author of this book?
Well, the author of this book, I mainly wrote about the making of the movie portion of it, but I definitely read American Prometheus, and I sort of know the thinking around the depiction of Oppenheimer. I think that growing up in Los Alamos, I knew Oppenheimer's name. I really was, I'm going to say, like incredibly incurious about what he did and why all these streets were named after him and things like that. And I'm really grateful that I got to really dig into its history. I think that everything about his regrets about the bomb are true. I think that he really did. He became a powerful advocate for trying to stop the development of the H bomb. He kind of felt like there had been enough destruction. I think also the depictions. There's been some criticism of the movie that they don't show what happened to the Japanese people, and if you're looking at the movie from like a purely subjective standpoint, that this is really inside Oppenheimer's head, that Nolan wrote the script from Oppenheimer's point of view, literally in the first person, that he wasn't actually thinking about the people who the bomb was destroying until he saw evidence of it.
No, and I think it's an interesting story that's yours. Like you said, streets named after him. He's lionized in the little community that you grew up in. But he's also part of the team that killed hundreds of thousands of people, or started the chain reaction that did that. And in the movie, you do see a bit of that. There is him kind of feeling like he has blood on his hands. The dream sequences that are haunting him. How do you feel? How do you feel the movie depicts him, the public perception of Robert Oppenheimer, based on what's going on in the movie? Is there any gap there, or was it right on?
I think that I would be shocked if the vast majority of people who went in to see Oppenheimer knew who he was or knew that much about his history. I just don't think. I mean, I went to school a long time ago in Los Alamos, but I don't even think that we learned that much about him in school. And I think that maybe that was a gap in the education, or maybe I was just not paying attention, or maybe it happened. I went there when I was in high school, and they taught it in middle school. I don't like I don't really know, but I do feel like I would love to hear someone from Los Alamos talking about what I'm missing. But I think that I think that it's hard to have sort of a gap in public perception when the public doesn't really is almost getting their education from the movie itself. And I do think that if people read American Prometheus, maybe they'll see sort of a difference. But yeah,
I think that's a really good answer.
Yeah.
We didn't really get to the hair and makeup, and there's a lot of funny stories in the book, and I could point to a few. Is there one you want to start with?
Well, I think my favorite one to report was called the 4-Hour Haircut, and it really has to do a lot with how movies are scheduled, which was something I didn't know until doing this book. Is that obviously I knew that movies don't film in chronological order, but in order for Cillian Murphy, who had lost 27 pounds, to play this role and was living on a 1-calorie diet so that he could maintain that weight in the bitter cold of New Mexico. They scheduled it so that his youthful days when he had long hair would be the very first thing that got shot, and that meant actually tacking 3 days of shooting in California onto the beginning of the shoot. So they had a set shoot date that started at Ghost Ranch, but then they realized oh my God, his hair. But we have to Cillian's losing all this weight, but he's growing his hair, and we don't want to put him in a wig, and so we're just gonna have to shoot earlier than we thought we were going to shoot. And then, so they shoot these 3 days that are supposed to take place in Cambridge and in UCLA. And he's got his floppy hair. It's sort of in the movie where he's having all his visions at the beginning of what the new physics looks like. And then they have to cut his hair, and it has to be the haircut that is they can't really change it that much. It's so it's going to be militaristically short. They're going to go to Ghost Ranch immediately afterwards. And so they scheduled his haircut, and I just have all these interviews with the hairdresser and the other people who were in the room, and Cillian Murphy, who couldn't remember anything, but because he just basically every day he would learn all his lines, perform, and then wipe the slate clean. But he could remember this haircut. It was the longest haircut of his life. And Christopher Nolan just stood over and monitored the cutting of every single piece of hair on his head. And then also that Cillian, I think, had this idea that the haircut needed to be longer. Maybe he didn't like the way that Oppenheimer looked so shorn. And Christopher Nolan really had an idea that it needed to be shorter, and they would go back and forth and back and forth. And then this was and then it became an everyday occurrence where every time Cillian Murphy sort of went on camera, at some point Christopher Nolan would come over and try to make his hair shorter, but it also, I think I was happy that they let me put that story in the book, but I think it actually really just demonstrates how detail oriented this director is, how much he cared about the smallest little detail in it being authentic. And was there another one that you were thinking about?
For hair, I think Robert Downey Jr. He had the as straws. He had the bald cap.
Yeah, well, he had
no, excuse me. They shaved the front of it.
They shaved the front of it. Yeah, and a lot of this, I thought it was funny that the big dilemma for the hair and makeup people is that people in the 40s smoked way more and didn't take care of themselves that well, and didn't look. They looked way older at whatever age that they were than we do now, and then especially these actors who have all the money to look great at all ages do. And so Robert Downey Jr. and Louis Strauss were almost the exact same age, but he's got a great head of hair, and so they had to sort of shave it back, and he just looked terrible, and bleach it, and then he just he had to go live his life. He was off for 3 weeks, and so he had to like go live his life in California with his hair looking like that, and it was actually pretty game.
And then the Softy brother, that was the Softy brother.
Yeah.
He had a situation with his makeup.
Yeah. So Benny was like a really fun interview because he actually when he was a young man almost went to physics grad school at Columbia. Like he almost became a physicist, and his choice was make weird movies or become a physicist. That's what he chose. So he played Edward Teller, and he always had to be in makeup because Teller was always like older than he was and pudgier, I think, than he was. And he also his hair somehow just like wouldn't stay flat, and so they just like they had to keep doing weird things to try to like. Apparently, his hair was like the hardest hair in the entire film. But I think what happened was, they were shooting in Los Alamos. It's the dead of winter, like March. They're shooting in Los Alamos, not the WAC building. I don't think had any heat in it. And so he was boiling up, and he came up with this like really clever idea to just put heating pads under his costume. And then the next day he did this scene in the Christmas party scene at Fuller Lodge, which is like incredibly packed and hot, and he thought he still needed the heating. And like all of his like entire face like melted off and had to do him. So that was.
Well, you did a great job dissecting the film, and there were a lot of different things that had to be solved along the way, whether it was that they couldn't build the World War II era props and pieces, so they'd have to ship them from LA every single day because there wasn't a company that they could work with to build them here. And what you see in the book a lot is Christopher Nolan solving problems on a high level. Did you experience that in your communication with him, writing the book? Did you think, wow, this is an exciting way that he worked out this problem?
Yeah, and I don't think it was just him. I think it was his collaborators. I think this goes back to some question that you asked earlier about sort of just how he puts together a team and how he works. It's like he's very loyal. He generally, people that he's worked with before, and he knows he can trust them. And I think like a few innovations or things that were interesting was like they were shooting on IMAX film. They had invented this like black and white IMAX, the first movie to shoot in black and white with IMAX. And so they had to work with IMAX to like develop the camera. They had to work with Panavision, I guess.
Yeah, Panavision for the camera, and then Kodak for the film.
Kodak for the film. But the other part that you don't really realize is that like you also have to develop that, and there was only one lab in the whole country that could develop this IMAX film in black and white and not make it turn purple or whatever. And so they had to work on this whole development process, and that lab was in LA. And also, Christopher Nolan likes to see a daily every single day. So likes to see what you shot the day before, make sure everything's working, make sure you don't have to reshoot anything. He really ever does reshoots. So they developed a system where they had two truckers. Like one trucker from LA would come and one trucker from New Mexico would go. They'd like meet in the middle and they'd like hand off the film. And then they'd go back to their respective places like every day that they shot in New Mexico. That's like how they got their film developed. Was that they had to like truck it across the country because you can't trust this to a courier service or something like that. I don't know. I thought all of the special effects stuff was super interesting.
Oh yeah, and you talk about the different ways they used melted metal, and
when you look at this movie, all of it was shot in camera. So none of it was done. The only thing that was done with a computer at all is taking a shot that was shot in camera and superimposing it on another shot. That's like the only part of digital effects that they actually did. So everything from like little explosions to the visions that he's having. They had this unit called the Mad Scientist Unit, or they didn't call it that. It was sort of nicknamed on set, the Mad Scientist Unit. It was just like this little tiny set of like 3 special effects guys who who were visual effects guys who like worked in a tent, and they would like go and explode things, and they would film them. They had their own IMAX camera, and then like every week they would sort of show what they'd come up with, and then they'd perfect it and actually film it with the cinematographer. But it was things like putting beads on a bunch of strings, and then motorizing a stick and like making it whirl around in front of the camera so that it looks like Cillian Murphy is envisioning atoms. And like when they shot that, it's just like these guys with a stick, like leaning over the camera. Like it's like a school project almost, but on like an incredibly high level. Or I'm trying to remember. I'm like
the fireplace.
Yeah. So there's I can't remember. I'm like forgetting what it looks like in the movie, but they would, if they wanted like sort of an image to feel kind of shaky, like Cillian Murphy, Oppenheimer is like watching the atoms of a fireplace move. They took a photograph of a fireplace, and then they projected on top of the real fireplace, and then they moved the projection, and that was like, that's how you get that effect. Like there's a scene in a courtroom where Jason Clark's sort of is interrogating Cillian Murphy, and it starts getting really intense, and then the wall cracks open behind them, and that's literally just like they figured out a way to crack open the wall, like to put a false wall in front of the real wall, crack it open, and they'd reoriented the room so that the false wall was in front of the doorway, and then you like shine a light through that so that you get this crack in the wall. It's like, it's very they sound like kids when they're putting it together, which is kind of fun.
Well, Jada, is there anything else you can tell us before we let the audience ask you some questions?
I think we've covered a lot of stuff, but I'm happy to answer more. I think the music in this movie is really wonderful, and Ludwig Göransson is it was done in just a really interesting way, which is that he started at the very beginning, and he oftentimes when a movie score is made, it's made the movie is finished, and then a composer sort of watches the images and writes whatever is part of the inspiration. But they basically just worked hand in hand, and Ludwig would just send new music like every single day, pretty much. And it was, I think they were composing during the pandemic, and his wife was a concert violinist, and she'd taken time off to have their two kids, and basically he brought her in, and she basically co-composed what ends up being Oppi's theme, which is a solo violin theme, and it just sounded like a really kind of lovely way to work, the two of them.
Yeah, I think every department just doing the best work of their careers, and Chris Nolan as the maestro or the conductor of all of this is really the theme in the book. And did we touch at all on how the main cast and crew was at the Abbey Q Inn?
Yeah, I think we forgot. Yeah, they were at the Abbey Q Inn.
And so, there's nothing open, and the restaurant closes at 8 p.m., so they're all having little parties together and playing board games and that type of thing. I think you called it a throwback to actually being in the World War II era.
Yeah. I think they called them their jail cells. They were like these little, because they were all these little cabins. But it was the main people. This like Cillian Murphy did not party with them, but the rest of them were having like a grand old time. So it was just, they were all COVID tests, so they could all hang out with each other at least. It was like Emily Blunt and Matt Damon and Josh Hartnett and Dane DeHaan. Yeah, and I don't think Downey wasn't there yet. Downey arrived in Santa Fe. A lot of them who wound up in, I think they did end up shipping some in from LA, but a lot of extras, especially in the Los Alamos scenes, ended up being Los Alamos scientists. And that's sort of typical, is that you don't want to ship people in. There's professional extras in LA and in New York, but who like always have their hair in a 1940s style or whatever it is, or just don't dye. You can't have someone in the 1940s who like dyed their hair green, that kind of thing. But they pulled from the local population, which just ends up being nuclear physicists and things like that when you're calling them a Salamis. And so yeah, I think they got to have a lot of fun. I probably was out in the cold for a really long time and dealing with like hair and makeup and various things. But I know that I heard a story from the costume department that someone brought in like a photograph of his grandfather, and they were able to make him look exactly like his grandfather.